what I really want to talk about today, though, is the spinnerbait. Question: what's the most important element of a spinnerbait when you're buying one or selecting one to fish? Blades. Thank you. Most people, I mean, there are some of them nowadays. They're so sexy you can't help but buy the way the head looks or the skirt. I mean, they're beautiful. I mean, all these baits. That's what I love about swim baits now. They're works of art. The Rico, you know, when he first came to Japan. I mean, you should have seen the original tail on a Pop-R. It looked like, you know, somebody's toothbrush. They'd cut off the bill on their toothbrush and stuck it back there on that back hook. You know, it wasn't this beautiful marabou feather or anything. But the key here is my favorite two blades of my whole career have been a Willow Leaf and an Indiana. My first Bassmaster Classic, and now I'm going to kind of go back on it a little bit, I was won in 1976. And do y'all know what I caught 22 of my 27 fish on? Any of you there? A squarebill. So now a lot of people think squarebill is just kind of a recent bait. 22 of my 27 fish came on a honeybee, which was a little bitty tiny squarebill that, you know, it's the smallest squarebill we make, but it was wood. The other five, though, and they were on my, the other five I caught of that 22 were my big guys. I had a 715, a 6'4", a 6'3", a 5-something, and a 4-something. And those, I caught 4 of those in about 20 casts the second day of the tournament. And I caught those on an Indiana blade burning and Indiana blade spinnerbait. So, again, I bring up that little squarebill deal because a lot of people think squarebills, you know, they're kind of a new thing, and they're not. They've been there forever. The reason most people didn't know about them because they were made out, they were custom wood baits that weren't available to the masses. They cost 20 to 50 bucks even back in the late 70s per bait. And they weren't very durable on top of that. And it's only that the hard plastic technology is only caught up with that being able to make that quality of a bait and that durable of a bait in the last 10 years. It was tried, but they couldn't, the hard plastic companies could not duplicate the qualities of a good wood squarebill. Plus, hard plastic companies had the bad habit of sticking weights in them and made them rattle, and they didn't realize the importance of a non-rattling bait. And then wood baits don't rattle, unless nowadays, yeah, you could make them rattle. But anyway, but that Indiana blade used to be my favorite blade to catch big fish on. The importance of a blade, when you select a spinnerbait, the blade is all about water displacement, okay? In other words, anything that moves through water pushes water out of the way, and that blade turn is just like a prop on an engine. It's pushing water out of the way. Well, that pushing water out of the way is appealing to the most sensitive and most sense of a bass, and that's the lateral line. A lateral line is the equivalent of echolocation in a well. Even if a bass is blind, or you're fishing pitch dark night, or you're fishing in muddy water, you can't see a bait that deep, he can feel that bait, and it draws a mental image in his brain, just like if he was looking at it. But even better than looking at it, he can feel the size of it. He can feel the direction it's moving, the speed it's moving at. And so that's why the blade is so crucial. It's because you can use, the first swim bait ever was a spinnerbait. And the reason it caught big bass, even though they're not really near as big as a swim bait, is because of water displacement. It gave the illusion of being bigger than it really was. And off-color water, you know, it's why a spinnerbait's so good, because it's giving the illusion of being bigger than it is, because if you're using a big Indiana or a big Colorado, and the bigger fish will react to it, because they normally won't eat something bigger. The laws of conservation of energy say how much energy I got to spend to eat that and how much I'm going to get in return. So a big fish obeys that law more than little fish do. Now in clear water, the problem with that theory is that even though the water displacement is, a bass can't, even though let's say it's 10 feet deep, you can see the bait, if the bass is back stuck in a weed bed and you throw a big bait out there that's displacing a lot of water, a little bait that's displacing a lot of water, the fish thinks it's big, he feels it, he comes out of the weeds to look at it, but when he sees it, what his lateral line is telling him that it's this big, and yet he looks at it and his eyes see that it's that big. Now he has a conflict of senses. That's the worst thing you can do to a fish. When you confuse his senses, you keep him from striking. So when he makes eye contact with the bait, it better match what his lateral line told him that size of that bait was. And that's why your big swim baits don't displace a lot of water. That's why that tail just barely moves. Because, if it did this, even though that swim bait's that long, his lateral line would tell him it's that big. That's why, but the way it's moving, if you watch big shad or something, their whole body's not doing this. It's just their tail's doing that. And that's why the guys that figured out swim bait figured that out. When in that clear water where you fish that swim bait, that water displacement is going to match what they're looking at. But anyway, that's the key with the spinnerbait. Is that blade tells you what water displacement is. The most popular blade today and all over the country, all over the world, is a willow leaf. It's the absolute worst blade you can fish, with the exception of a couple of things. If you like to weight spinnerbaits, it's good for that, because it doesn't have much torque, because it doesn't have much water displacement, has a lot of flash, but it won't roll your head. So the novice fisherman, he can choose any willow leaf and succeed in waking it. When you fish a Colorado or a Indiana, and this is actually a cross that I designed 10 years ago, a cross between a willow leaf and an Indiana. It's called a long drop blade. Or you fish this blade, you've got to have the proper head if you're going to wake it. Or that blade's got a lot of torque, and it's going to turn that head over. This spinnerbait has caught the largest bass ever caught in a class, Bassmaster Classic, on a spinnerbait. And the largest, and spinnerbaits have before the record was broken here several years ago, the spinnerbait had the classic record for years and years and years, and it was a Colorado blade. What I'm trying to make the point here is, if you want to catch big fish, you need blades that displace water. Willow leaves don't displace water. This is a 3.5 size long drop blade. To get the equivalent water displacement in willow leaf, you've got to throw a number 7 willow leaf to get the same. What's the problem with that? The problem with that is we like to fish spinnerbaits in the wind. And you get those big blades, you're going to do get more wind resistance, you're going to have more helicoptering effect, and you just can't get the accuracy and the distance that you can with a smaller blade. This gets the same water displacement, but I don't have that wind resistance. That's the beauty of the long drop blade. I love the willow leaf. I'm picking on it, but I love it, because I burn and wake a lot of spinnerbaits. But I know that I have caught a lot more 7-pound plus fish on Indiana blades than I have ever caught on a willow leaf. And never caught a big fish on a willow leaf, and that size fish or above. They're always on a Colorado or an Indiana, or now the long drop. The long drop blade is what now holds the record for a Bassmaster Classic, a bass spinnerbait that's been caught on a spinnerbait. And I caught it about 5 years ago in the Classic in Florida. Unfortunately, sad story, yeah, but I've had the second biggest bass ever caught in the Bassmaster Classic my whole career. When I won the Classic in 1976 on Lake Guntersville, I caught a 715 burning that big Indiana spinnerbait that year when I won the Classic. That same day, not Bobby Murray, Ricky Green caught an 815 on a big Colorado spinnerbait. And that became the biggest bass ever caught in the Bassmaster Classic until about 5 years ago. And I had the second biggest. We're in Toho at the Classic. That day, I catch that 10, 11 on that long drop spinnerbait. I'm holding him, I'm shaking. Some of you probably saw it where I'm holding this fish, my hand's shaking. And I know, I finally got everything, because I own the Classic, except for the big bass. And I finally got the big bass. Well, I'll be dang if the same day, forgive me for getting his name, caught an 11 something off a bed, So that's the biggest bass ever caught off in a Bassmaster Classic, but it was caught off the bed, and I don't count that myself. But I caught mine on spinnerbait. So mine is still the biggest ever caught on a spinnerbait. But that's really the whole key is when you select your blades, is this water displacement and what you're really trying, the image you're trying to create with that fish. You know, a blade will pull a fish a whole lot further away if you have the proper water displacement. But now when you get with a long draw for the Colorado again and you're trying to burn it, you have to have a heavier head. Now when I'm burning a bait, I prefer a 1/2 ounce to a 3/4 ounce. Now the long draw blade does have very clear, good application in clear water environments, because basically you can get good water displacement with it, but you don't have to create a big flashy blade that sometimes turns fish off on bright days, even if you have wind. I only make the long drop in 2 sizes, 3.5 and a 4.5, and in silver or in a gold. But it's because it does have a lot of water displacement. It literally, if you steal it off that bait and put it on one of yours, I guarantee you, in a day, if you fished it all day, you will break a wire. It's got that much torque. But sometimes, and I'm going to be honest here, sometimes in real clear water, like I said, and I want a little tiny bait, you couldn't throw my long drop blade. I'd go to willow leaf, because that long drop blade on 3/8 ounce head is going to try to roll that head over. I only throw a long drop on a 1/2 ounce when I'm burning it, or 3/4 ounce. So then I'm going to be fishing a willow leaf, because that torque and that water displacement is going to make it very difficult to wake or burn. You know, the sad thing, what the willow leaf has done to the spinnerbait industry is that it's getting harder and harder to find those old big Colorados and those cup Colorados, and even it's hard to find. I don't even hardly see an Indiana blade on baits anymore. You know, and that's why I came up with the long drop myself. This bait's actually been out now probably 7-8 years. But we don't really promote it that much. I'm kind of trying to keep it to myself. But it is an incredible blade, and especially, and I know there's guys out here. I hear both sides of it out here. Well, I don't ever catch fish on spinnerbaits. These lakes are too clear and stuff like that. And of course I tell them in the Lake Mead story. In Lake Mead, it's 20-foot visibility that year. I caught them on a spinnerbait in August, September. Yeah, I was staying in the wind. I was catching them and I was burning it. I didn't want them to get a good look at it, and so, you know, and back then that skirt I used then was the first transparent skirt that the spinnerbait market ever saw. And unfortunately now they're all that same material, and they tend to not have the action of the old rubber skirts. And I didn't mean for that to happen, but you can't hardly find an old rubber skirt anymore. And what happens with these skirts is this material that they make those translucent skirts out of. Stanley Jigs had it first, and I had the very first one when I won the U.S. Open. The problem is they don't really have much action on their own, and that's why normally I'll put a Lucky Strike ringworm behind it, because that bait has action, and then it gives the skirt more action. But I want that skirt pulsating and moving. The bigger the blade is, it'll force it to move a little bit too. That's why, again, a willow leaf really won't. Willow leaf is a flash bait. The willow leaf is good also, and if you're slow rolling it through heavy vegetation, because it doesn't have that big swinging torque that a Colorado, Indiana, or the long drop blade does. So it has a function, but it shouldn't be dominate the spinnerbait market like it does. And unfortunately, that's unfortunate for the anglers, because they really don't understand the benefits of water displacement in those other blades. And I asked this question here about 2 years ago to a bunch of sports writers that might be, I kind of said, where have all the good spinnerbait fishermen gone? Because there are none left. And that's the reason. Everybody now fishes willow leaves. They don't understand water displacement. They basically either burn it or fish it kind of slow but not really deep. You know, the really good spinnerbait fishermen that I used to know don't exist anymore. And I'm not saying they don't exist, maybe they're just keeping it a secret. But they don't exist on the circuit. Kevin would be mad at me if he heard me saying this, because he thinks he's a good spinnerbait fisherman. And he is good but Kevin could catch a fish on a rock with hooks on it, because he understands some of the real basic elements of how do you convert random casts into non-random casts. That's his strength. That was my strength in my heyday. How do you convert random casts to non-random casts? But that's a whole different seminar, and that's the most important thing in fishing. But still, Bobby Murray, Elroy Kruger, which you guys never heard of, probably would have been the greatest angler ever. He was kind of like Dave Levy. He didn't know how to talk to the media. He didn't really, people misread him constantly. So, you know, he didn't become popular. He had bad luck with women. And unfortunately, all those things kept both of them from becoming, and I love them both, but they kept both of them becoming the full potential they could have become. But he was an incredible spinnerbait fisherman. He could fish them 50 foot deep and 30 foot deep, and he could slow roll them. He could drop those big single blades. Back then they had the twin. Shannon had two blades. You don't even see it anymore. It's called a Shannon twin spin. And but those guys don't exist anymore, you know. And so I do slow roll it, but I don't usually slow roll it much deeper than about 8, 9, 10 foot. I don't even consider myself near in the class of the Bobby Murray and Elroy Krugers